Donald Trump frequently emphasized prioritizing his relatives, a potent slogan he advocated openly, yet the recent disclosure by Barack Obama disrupts this storyline in a manner nobody could have anticipated. The astonishing suggestion implies that Barron is not merely his child, but rather, in a profoundly intricate turn of events, his biological grandchild. The proof, as presented by his former rival, has been completely exposed, and there is absolutely no retreating from its far-reaching societal consequences. For many years, Melania and Ivanka offered themselves as far more than simply a typical household to the masses. They functioned as a powerful cultural emblem. Wherever they traveled, photographers snapped pictures, individuals murmured regarding their riches and clout, and they appeared to personify the absolute ideal of public flawlessness. Whether appearing on periodical fronts, participating in prominent gatherings, or strolling down the Crimson Walkway, they seemed completely invulnerable to outside scrutiny. Every single grin, every subtle movement, and every flawlessly positioned portrait conveyed a narrative of triumph, immense authority, and a highly covetable existence. To a vast majority, the former president served as the ultimate father figure, radiating an unstoppable aura through his assured behavior, calculated rhetoric, and massive persona. The public eagerly awaited his every pronouncement, entirely persuaded of its significance, while he projected an aura of command and supremacy that was impossible to disregard. Melania, characterized by her refined grace and composure, functioned as his ideal counterpart, seldom speaking out of turn while her mere presence delivered a distinct message. They presented a household that genuinely possessed everything, and alongside them stood Ivanka, youthful and glowing, embodying intense drive and worldly elegance through her booming career. As a unified front, they broadcasted a vision of contemporary achievement that countless individuals deeply respected, felt jealous of, and actively strove to replicate in their own lives. For numerous decades, society was trained to accept this specific narrative, with news publications routinely depicting the clan as thriving on affluence, leverage, and immense authority. Each public showing was exhaustively planned, every social exchange was deliberately weighed, and audiences instinctively believed their hidden realities were just as impeccable as their bright smiles. For anyone lacking personal ties to the household, it remained an incredibly simple fable to swallow, as fractures in this painstakingly built exterior were almost never publicly visible. Nobody possessed the courage to publicly interrogate what genuinely occurred away from the cameras, even though quiet murmurs and faint rumors did circulate behind the glossy veneer. These unverified tales failed to gain momentum for nearly 2 decades, remaining easily ignored whispers because no one was brave enough to articulate the potential hidden realities. Employees and insiders conversed in hushed tones, absolutely off the record, taking great care to avoid attracting any unwanted scrutiny to their private observations. Even when probes were initiated, access was promptly denied, and inquiries were courteously yet resolutely steered in completely different directions to protect the established narrative. Meanwhile, the populace kept watching the flawless unit beam at upscale galas, participate in philanthropic banquets, and pose for elaborate photo shoots as if their reality lacked any blemishes. Their dominance extended beyond mere optics. They had expertly honed the discipline of persuasion, utilizing the patriarch's magnetism and commercial brilliance to establish undeniable command. The matriarch's sophistication provided legitimacy, while the eldest daughter's vitality and attractiveness drew in a fresher demographic, allowing them to jointly craft an incredibly unassailable public identity. These civic appearances operated like diligently choreographed theatrical routines, but they were precisely the type of routines that the general public desperately wished to embrace as authentic. Citizens did not merely watch this family, they revered them, and in certain instances they even harbored a deep-seated apprehension toward their consolidated power. That facade of flawlessness grew practically inviolable, but as is frequently the case, such perfection often masks a hidden truth that remains incredibly difficult to discern. Despite all their beaming expressions and meticulously arranged portraits, the reality occurring away from the spotlight started to reveal a notably divergent narrative. Individuals operating in close proximity to the household occasionally observed peculiar behaviors and specific instances that failed to align with the accepted external storyline. There were periods when the eldest daughter would disappear for consecutive weeks without any provided justification, while the matriarch occasionally appeared detached and preoccupied during civic engagements. Even the patriarch, known for his resolute self-assurance, would intermittently exhibit brief moments of stress or unease that were hastily concealed using a humorous quip or a boisterous comment. Still, nobody appeared capable of connecting these fragmented incidents in a logical manner, allowing everything to look entirely pristine to those observing from the outside. An everyday onlooker or even a dedicated follower would perceive nothing but a unit that had secured the clout, acknowledgement, and deference that so many others craved. However, for individuals who examined the situation more intimately and registered the minor discrepancies, a mounting intuition suggested that a major secret was being exhaustively concealed. The cheerful expressions frequently failed to illuminate their eyes. Instances of familial unity could seem temporary, and the refined exterior was fundamentally nothing more than a crafted illusion. What rendered this facade so effective was not simply the family's self-presentation, but rather the astonishing eagerness with which the global audience embraced the narrative. Society yearned to trust in the fable of the flawless household, as it represented an idealized existence that appeared accessible solely to the affluent and powerful elite. Print media and periodicals, frequently acting as willing participants, sustained this mythology by capturing them at functions, emphasizing their triumphs, and purposely overlooking the minor contradictions. Gradually, the populace ceased their inquiries, and within the collective consciousness, the prominent family transformed into an entity that was perceived as entirely beyond reproach. Nevertheless, concealed truths possess a tendency to bide their time, and even the most stringently upheld exteriors remain inherently delicate and prone to eventual collapse. What society interpreted as absolute perfection was actually a laboriously preserved deception, harboring untold narratives beneath the radiant grins, luxurious attire, and civic engagements. For nearly 20 years, these specific accounts stayed buried, secured behind shut entrances, and spoken of solely within the confines of deeply confidential discussions. Despite the immense focus, widespread celebrity, and collective reverence, the clan bore their hidden truth silently, anticipating the inevitable instant when it could no longer be brushed aside. That specific juncture would ultimately arrive, forcing a global audience, long persuaded of the unit's absolute flawlessness, to confront the stark disparity between reality and presentation. The exhaustively designed illusion of cheerfulness and grace would ultimately fracture, exposing a reality that had remained successfully obscured for multiple decades. Once this reality emerged, it promised to upend everything society believed it comprehended regarding one of the most universally recognized dynasties on the planet. The morning of the live broadcasted occasion commenced just like any other day, or at least it appeared that way to the casual observer. Recording devices captured the scene, brilliant illuminations glared, and the gathered crowd hummed with a palpable sense of eager expectation for the upcoming address. The current commander-in-chief, presently serving his subsequent tenure, advanced toward the speaking stand carrying the recognizable aura of dominance he had nurtured over many years. Every single shift in posture and hand motion appeared deliberately engineered to broadcast an image of unyielding fortitude and total uncompromising mastery over the environment. The attendees anticipated audacious statements and piercing viewpoints, fully expecting a theatrical execution that only this specific political figure was capable of providing. During the initial moments, his discourse adhered to the planned text as he discussed legislative triumphs and the national condition with his signature self-confident swagger. The spectators clapped during pivotal points, and numerous individuals watching from their residences signaled agreement, anticipating absolutely nothing that would deviate from the standard routine. Suddenly, without any preliminary caution, the entire dynamic drastically altered as the speaker hesitated, examining the audience as though evaluating a potential hazard. He then vocalized a moniker that immediately transformed the atmosphere within the venue, drawing immense focus simply by mentioning the name of Barack Obama. The subsequent declaration was what truly caused every single person to lean closer as he loudly and steadily proclaimed his predecessor to be utterly feeble. He asserted that his former opponent never genuinely advocated for the nation, questioning aloud why the man had even been welcome to the gathering that evening. The phrasing lingered in the atmosphere, dense and intentional, prompting a tangible hush to wash over the auditorium for the initial time that afternoon. The crowd, highly familiar with these audacious declarations, instinctively detected that this particular instance felt remarkably distinct and intensely, intentionally antagonistic. It transcended standard partisan critique, feeling intensely hostile and seemingly engineered to incite a reaction, causing many to look toward the former leader in anticipation. Protection agents subtly repositioned themselves, acutely cognizant that a single miscalculation had the potential to rapidly intensify the already mounting friction within the room. The former president, however, stayed completely unflappable, with his visage displaying zero fury, no astonishment, and absolutely no haste to issue a defensive retort. He merely remained motionless and resolute, silently watching the current situation unfold while attendees began observing the severe dichotomy between the two prominent figures. They noted the aggressive nature of the verbal assault in direct contrast with the tranquil, calculated demeanor of the man standing silently in the crowd. The strain intensified, but it was not the variety stemming from ambiguity. Rather, it was a silent pressure generated by the anticipation of a colossal confrontation. Everyone was bracing for a response, expecting a spectacular clash, yet that anticipated explosion of tempers failed to materialize in the room. The speaker persisted, apparently driven to occupy the quietness, discussing executive command, historical milestones, and executive choices while highlighting the alleged failures of his predecessor. His delivery was cutting and bordering on hostile, magnifying his personal vigor while attempting to erode the historical footprint of the silent man observing him. Nevertheless, as he continued talking, the onlookers started detecting an alternative phenomenon. It was not merely the substance of the speech, but the underlying momentum. Unregulated self-assurance can occasionally mimic sheer aggression, and aggression directed toward a target who refuses to engage in similar fashion often forfeits its efficacy. As the verbal barrage became more pointed, a nuanced transformation transpired among the attendees, who realized the silence they were witnessing was a calculated strategy. The former leader was not merely idling there, he was actively opting out of the provoked contest, recognizing that an irate reply would merely feed the desired circus. By maintaining his composure, the silent observer was effectively taking back command of the situation, shifting the room's mood from conflict anticipation to pure captivation. The crowd longed to witness the next development, not because they desired explosive arguments, but because they detected a concealed potency in this tranquil forbearance. Witnesses subsequently characterized the sequence as dreamlike, noting how the typically dominating speaker found himself broadcasting into an environment where his rhetoric vanished against an impenetrable barrier of serenity. His usual vigor, which had propelled him to the highest office and defined his public identity, smashed into a distinct brand of fortitude that remained entirely mute. This alternative strength refused to yell, make stipulations, or act hastily, allowing the spectators to physically sense the gravity of the unfolding political theater. Even devoted loyalists began to realize that this clash was not proceeding according to anyone's preconceived expectations, birthing a novel type of tension in the quiet. The onlookers grasped that this event was no longer solely regarding historical impact or legislation. It centered entirely on veracity, authority, and genuine social leverage. They recognized a type of influence that does not originate from boisterous declarations, but rather radiates from a restrained, highly intentional physical presence. Individuals intuitively comprehended that the aggressive and stimulating remarks were improbable to accomplish their planned objective against such a steadfast demeanor. Consequently, while lenses recorded every perspective and journalists murmured among themselves, the true narrative evolved into the juxtaposition of these two wildly divergent methods of exerting power. The monologue eventually arrived at a logical intermission, although the speaker continued to survey the gathering, desperately searching for any indication of vulnerability. He had dispensed his judgment, asserted his position, and anticipated a specific reaction, yet the profound quiet persisted, thoroughly saturating the expansive auditorium. The tranquil presence filled the void in a manner that language simply could not accomplish, essentially communicating profound concepts without ever parting his lips. It demonstrated that genuine might is not quantified by auditory volume or the velocity of an assault, but rather by restraint, forbearance, and absolute lucidity. Individuals watching that broadcast would later label the interaction as indelible, marking an uncommon occurrence where current and former executives engaged in an intensely personal standoff. The initial offensive had been audacious, boisterous, and belligerent, explicitly formulated to conquer the public dialogue and diminish the target's standing. The target's quiet endurance, conversely, transformed the scenario into an instructional display of moderation, proving that occasionally the most potent rebuttal is total silence. It proved that waiting, scrutinizing, and allowing the facts to materialize organically can serve as a far superior tactic in the face of direct antagonism. By the time the speaker departed the platform, the ambient mood had fundamentally altered, leaving attendees with the recollection of an entirely unparalleled dispute. In this unique clash, the most deafening voice was countered by the most silent, yet inexplicably more formidable presence within the entire facility. This occurrence would persist in the collective consciousness, serving as a caution that sheer bravado does not equate to fortitude, and that composure frequently resonates louder than piercing critique. Following the targeted verbal assault, the auditorium stayed burdened with pressure, as everybody still anticipated explosive arguments or an instantaneous, chaotic dispute. Instead, the former executive stepped out, his countenance serene and calculated, showing no signs of wrath or any compulsion to rapidly justify his own actions. He began communicating in a cadence that was unwavering, methodical, and oddly compelling, immediately capturing the undivided focus of every individual present. He instructed the crowd to recognize that true fortitude does not always correlate with the most deafening vocals or the most exaggerated physical expressions. He noted that authentic guidance is not demonstrated by the severity of your critiques, but rather by your conduct when the cameras are turned away. It is validated by the decisions you enact and the moral soundness you uphold across every conceivable circumstance, prompting the audience to listen with rapt attention. Some individuals leaned closer while others held their breath, feeling the tranquil command in his phrasing that sharply opposed the abrasive swagger displayed earlier. It resonated as more than a mere lecture on statecraft. It felt akin to a fundamental lesson regarding morality, integrity, and the foundational methods of exercising influence. Then, without interrupting his steady pacing, the speaker pivoted his attention toward a shockingly unexpected subject: the immediate relatives of his political adversary. This abrupt conversational pivot caused pulses to quicken and lenses to zoom in closer, leaving the attendees simultaneously inquisitive, apprehensive, and deeply fascinated. He commanded the room to cast their memories back to when the eldest daughter was 24, speaking with an unwavering and authoritative tone. She was experiencing the pinnacle of her fashion career, frequently gracing publications, strutting down catwalks, and remaining perpetually under the societal microscope. Suddenly, she vanished for a duration of several months, completely evading all photographic equipment and civic gatherings without any substantial, verified explanation. Her disappearance was rationalized at the time as a hiatus from public scrutiny to concentrate on personal affairs, a narrative the public generally swallowed without resistance. However, the current speaker's statements insinuated an entirely contrary reality, indicating that a massive secret had been diligently obscured for an extended period. He did not conclude his remarks there. He proceeded to narrate specifics that caused the listeners to draw even nearer in sheer astonishment. He asserted that vintage pictures from that specific time frame exhibit alterations in her physical form, which the press had previously dismissed as mere wardrobe selections. He argued that upon closer inspection and careful consideration of the chronological sequence, these physical modifications start to adopt a completely different significance. He referenced previously suppressed testimonies from former personnel who had aided the dynasty, individuals who were now stepping forward through documented evidence to shatter the facade. These internal sources detailed occurrences that had never been openly admitted, claiming the young woman had covertly delivered a child inside a secluded medical facility. This event allegedly transpired under an assumed identity, entirely removed from societal observation, ensuring nobody at the time possessed any knowledge of the situation. This highly sensitive information had been painstakingly concealed from public awareness until a few months subsequently, when the matriarch debuted before photographers holding the infant. She was introduced as the beaming parent, cradling the latest successor to the familial empire, and the entire world accepted this narrative without a single public inquiry. The societal facade remained intact. The matriarch was the parent, the younger woman was the sophisticated elder sibling, and the unit maintained its flawless aura of affluence and power. Yet the speaker's assertions initiated a profound reevaluation of that meticulously built fable, casting it in a strikingly disparate and unsettling illumination. He challenged the audience to consider a scenario where the actual truth drastically diverged from the official story they had been fed for years. The auditorium fell silent as the attendees absorbed the staggering gravity of his proposition, realizing this was no longer standard political discourse. It had morphed into a stunning exposure regarding domestic cover-ups and long-maintained fictions as he methodically laid out the chronological sequence of events. He reiterated the daughter's lengthy disappearance, the subsequent quiet delivery, and the later public emergence of the infant with the matriarch acting as the mother. He explained that all these events correspond perfectly with dates, pictures, and testimonies that nobody had successfully linked together during that specific era. However, when these fragmented elements are combined, an entirely novel narrative takes shape, prompting the individuals in the auditorium to murmur amongst themselves in utter disbelief. The statements were highly inflammatory, yet they possessed a systematic nature that rendered them incredibly challenging to casually brush aside or ignore. This was not a frantic allegation screamed in a fit of rage. It was a deliberately structured thesis, supported by chronological data and direct eyewitness testimony. Even those who had continually monitored the dynasty's civic persona experienced a sudden shock, having viewed the clan as entirely beyond reproach and fully commanding their narrative. The notion that their external identity could have been so systematically fabricated to obscure a revelation of this scale seemed almost inconceivable to comprehend. Nevertheless, the speaker's delivery rendered the conclusion practically irrefutable, completely monopolizing the attendees' focus by the time he took a momentary pause. What initiated as a skirmish over legislative dominance had miraculously mutated into a staggering unmasking of obscured realities, forever altering the room's atmosphere. Citizens recognized that the societal facade they had embraced for decades might be completely fraudulent, built entirely upon a narrative that was now facing severe, direct interrogation. It was not merely the substance of the disclosures that entranced the room, it was the tranquil, intentional method in which the information was disseminated. The speaker exhibited zero wrath, utilized no mockery, and completely avoided yelling, relying solely on verified points, logical links, and a steadfast commitment to accuracy. The anxiety within the venue transitioned from simple inquisitiveness to profound skepticism, and ultimately settled into a state of absolute, undeniable wonder. For a rare moment, the onlookers were not consuming the event for mere amusement. They were actively seeking comprehension, desperately attempting to assemble the massive ramifications of the speech. Upon the conclusion of his exposition, it became evident that this specific juncture transcended partisan competition, serving instead as a testament to disclosure, forbearance, and measured rhetoric. The former leader had seized command without resorting to deafening proclamations or offensive strikes, opting instead to calmly introduce data that mandated a complete intellectual reset. In that precise instant, the globe started perceiving the prominent family's societal identity through a radically different lens, questioning the validity of their flawless facade. The impeccable household, the radiant expressions, and the monumental triumphs were no longer adequate reasons to blindly trust their curated public appearances. The narrative being unfurled implied that beneath every glossy portrait and meticulously planned gathering, monumental secrets had been actively suppressed for decades. As individuals departed from that profound experience, one specific concept dominated their consciousness above all other reflections regarding the shocking event. They realized that occasionally tranquil phrasing and systematic proof yield vastly more influence than the most deafening, aggressive assault imaginable. In this particular instance, those tranquil words were poised to unveil a domestic mystery capable of stunning the entire globe, increasing the tension with every syllable spoken. What originated as a dialogue concerning executive command and household structures now bordered on the realm of the practically unimaginable for the captivated audience. The already anxious crowd could sense an impending disclosure, although absolutely nobody could have anticipated the true scale of the impending revelation. The orator's tone stayed tranquil, unwavering, and purposeful as he redirected the spotlight toward the youngest member of the dynasty, who had maintained a subdued civic presence. He noted that the boy had perpetually been viewed as the newest inheritor of the family's legacy, recognized globally as the offspring of the matriarch and patriarch. He acknowledged this as the accepted societal narrative, while simultaneously warning that the visible storyline frequently contradicts the actual historical series of events. A wave of astonishment rippled across the attendees, causing individuals to lean closer as they intuitively grasped that the impending statement would shatter their established paradigms. The speaker refrained from elevating his volume or employing theatrical motions, opting instead to let the sheer gravity of his phrasing permeate the silent auditorium. Every individual sentence was painstakingly selected, and every hesitation was calculated to foster maximum comprehension regarding the matriarch's public relationship with the child. He stated she had consistently been portrayed as the mother, photographed cradling him, and positioned as the beaming guardian of the dynasty's youngest heir. However, he posited that by tracing the chronological timeline, the obscured components begin to expose an entirely distinct and shocking reality. He systematically presented the substantiation, reminding the audience of the eldest daughter's prolonged absence from societal view during the apex of her fashion profession. Nobody possessed concrete knowledge of her whereabouts, and the press had willingly swallowed ambiguous justifications regarding private downtime and wardrobe modifications. He emphasized the glaring discrepancies in that accepted fiction, pointing out that nobody had bothered to interrogate the timeline during that specific era. The orator clarified that these disappearances were not coincidental, but rather aligned perfectly with a covert delivery executed under a pseudonym to dodge scrutiny. The resulting infant was subsequently shielded from the public gaze, prompting the attendees to murmur, shake their heads in skepticism, and strain to comprehend the presented logic. The speaker persisted without hesitation, allowing each subsequent word to fall into position like a fragment of a complex solving puzzle. He noted that several months following this concealed delivery, the matriarch debuted with the boy, leading the entire world to automatically deduce her maternity. He countered this assumption by stating that the chronology, the photographic evidence, and the testimonies from former staff members narrate a drastically divergent history. He declared that these elements indicate the eldest daughter is, in reality, the biological parent of the youngest child, causing the auditorium to plunge into absolute silence. Sharp inhalations echoed through the venue as photographers rapidly snapped pictures, documenting the collective expressions of utter astonishment and profound bewilderment. The magnitude of the assertion was impossible to disregard, forcing those who had venerated the clan's flawless civic identity to urgently reconcile it with this jarring new reality. The former leader did not merely rely on allegations. He introduced what he identified as concrete proof, including chronological charts and insider testimonies that corroborated his claims. These were not frivolous whispers, but rather highly specific details intended to undergird a sequence of events that had been suppressed for almost 2 decades. Each new piece of data bolstered the preceding one, leaving the spectators struggling to process their own disbelief and overwhelming sense of awe. Then arrived the most astonishing sequence, as the speaker brought forth a physical document, described as a salvaged paternity dossier from the former president's legal archives. Upon this specific page, the eldest daughter was officially documented as the biological mother, while the patriarch's own signature at the base verified the record. The attendees could scarcely trust their own vision, observing a tangible paper that, if authentic, appeared to definitively resolve the controversy once and for all. Even the current commander-in-chief, typically swift with a retort, appeared utterly paralyzed, his gaze darting erratically from the parchment to the crowd and back to his rival. For this singular occasion, his vocabulary deserted him, and the customary swagger that characterized his persona seemingly evaporated, supplanted by an unprecedented display of defenselessness. The quietness permeating the venue was intense, extending far beyond anyone's anticipations, with absolutely zero physical movement or spoken words breaking the spell. The unmasking lingered in the atmosphere like an unbearably massive burden, while the speaker's serenity only magnified the extreme seriousness of the situation. He refused to boast, ridicule, or celebrate the immense bewilderment he had instigated, choosing instead to let the documentation communicate its own message. Every single portrait, timeline, and dossier converged upon the same irrefutable deduction. The diligently built familial facade was potentially a massive fabrication. The crowd started to comprehend the absolute scale of the exposure, realizing that for decades the matriarch had been universally recognized as the mother of the youngest heir. The eldest sibling had played the role of the sophisticated daughter in the limelight, perpetually composed and beaming, making this new reality seem incredibly convoluted. A secret obscured for decades had ultimately emerged, carrying massive consequences that transcended the mere private affairs of a prominent political dynasty. It served as a narrative concerning optics, authority, and covert operations, demonstrating how painstakingly engineered civic identities can successfully camouflage the actual truth. It highlighted how the stories disseminated to the global population are frequently constructed to shield legacies rather than to broadcast factual occurrences. Furthermore, it functioned as an instructional example of how even the most heavily scrutinized households can harbor mysteries that evade the world's most observant critics. By the time the address concluded, the auditorium was entirely mute with astonishment and deep reflection, leaving the attendees to internalize the shocking information. Flashbulbs ignited, journalists conversed in hushed tones, and every single person recognized that the rigorously preserved illusion of the flawless household had been comprehensively shattered. The disclosure regarding the youngest heir and the specifics of his nativity undermined long-established convictions, compelling everyone to reevaluate the narratives they had blindly accepted. In that precise instance, it grew apparent that fortitude is not consistently exhibited via audacious phrasing or boisterous societal announcements. Occasionally, true strength is validated by forbearance, verifiable proof, and an unwavering dedication to exposing the factual record which the former leader had masterfully demonstrated. He had introduced a narrative that was startling, intimate, and profoundly exposing, executing the task with a serene command that rendered the most arrogant individuals speechless. The spectators departed possessing a fresh comprehension. The observable universe frequently diverges from actual reality, and seemingly invulnerable figures can conceal paradigm-shifting secrets. The paralysis resulting from the disclosure did not dissipate rapidly. Long after the gathering concluded, individuals remained fixated on the unprecedented spectacle they had witnessed. The mythology of the prominent dynasty, meticulously refined over decades, now appeared shattered, replacing their previously impeccable civic identity with glaring interrogations and paradoxes. What had been suppressed for almost 20 years had finally breached the surface, compelling the entire populace to wrestle with the massive ensuing ramifications. During the subsequent days, the consequence of the unmasking proliferated silently yet vigorously as attendees mentally replayed the event and scrutinized previously ignored nuances. The concept that the youngest heir's lineage might deviate from the official narrative destabilized deep-rooted beliefs, leading people to completely reconsider their prior assumptions. Citizens began to grasp that the grins, the civic appearances, and the orchestrated gatherings were not merely superficial displays, but calculated efforts to sustain a potentially fabricated storyline. For the current leader, the disclosure landed with unprecedented force. Renowned for his swagger and narrative mastery, he found himself facing an entirely novel, unmanageable crisis. While he had weathered numerous assaults from legislative adversaries, journalistic outlets, and international detractors, this specific challenge struck at the very core of his foundational mythology. The tranquil, deliberate execution of the unmasking provided him with no avenue for a rapid counterattack and no mechanism to summarily reject the presented documentation. For the initial time within a highly visible forum, the rigorously built shielding of his public persona appeared to crumble before the watching world. The attendees, the press, and even legislative analysts found it impossible to disregard the nuanced potency of the unprecedented exchange they had just witnessed. The leader's boisterous, combative methodology, which consistently demanded focus and dictated storylines, had encountered an utterly unfamiliar force, serene forbearance and absolute lucidity. His opponent had refrained from shouting, mocking, or launching ad hominem attacks, electing simply to present the data, link the variables, and allow the proof to resonate independently. Through this action, he successfully converted a scenario of impending conflict into a staggering disclosure that destabilized foundational assumptions down to their very roots. For the general populace, the saga morphed into a profound tutorial on optics, prompting many to acknowledge their prolonged susceptibility to engineered facades and managed fictions. The mythology of the flawless household was a narrative the public desperately yearned to trust, utilizing the beaming photos to construct a mirage of absolute perfection. However, the revelation concerning the child's lineage served as a stark reminder that even the most stringently protected facades can obscure secrets that inevitably surface. Reporters, academicians, and legislative commentators commenced analyzing the occurrence from every imaginable perspective, attempting to decode its massive societal footprint. A segment of the analysts concentrated on the ramifications concerning the executive's command and trustworthiness, while others pondered the impact on the prominently featured female relatives. Inquiries that had previously never been voiced publicly suddenly became inescapable, leading society to wonder how the clan had successfully safeguarded such a massive cover-up. People debated what this meant for the general understanding of the dynasty's leverage and unity, and crucially, what it revealed regarding the vast chasm between optics and truth. The unmasking additionally ignited contemplation extending far past legislative and individual spheres, evolving into an expansive dialogue regarding human tendencies and the lengths required to protect crucial mythologies. It served as a potent reminder that dominance and clout are frequently deceptive, and that even seemingly untouchable dynasties living idealized existences can conceal massive underlying realities. Unearthing those realities occasionally necessitates forbearance, serene scrutiny, and meticulous exhibition, attributes that frequently prove vastly more effective than fury, clamor, or direct clashes. For individuals who had venerated the dynasty for decades, the unmasking proved simultaneously staggering and grounding, as they had viewed the clan as the ultimate standard of achievement. Yet the unfolding narrative reminded the public that authentic existence is typically significantly more intricate, undermining prior assumptions concerning fortitude, reputation, and the lasting influence of optics. Civic smiles and orchestrated functions, regardless of their careful planning, simply cannot obscure everything forever, as veracity ultimately discovers an avenue to the surface. Even as the days progressed, the recollection of that specific afternoon persisted, with individuals retelling the saga to companions and emphasizing the unique delivery of the disclosure. The former leader's tranquil, calculated technique provided a glaring juxtaposition against his rival's belligerent methodology, leaving an indelible mark on every single spectator. It operated as a stark caution that genuine fortitude is quantified not solely by rhetoric or physical deeds, but by the capacity to confront reality with unshakable composure. Ultimately, the narrative of the prominent dynasty, their suppressed realities, and the disclosure regarding the youngest heir transcended a mere provocative allegation. It morphed into a definitive lesson regarding optics, moral soundness, and the undeniable force of tranquil resolve in the face of established power structures. The societal facade that had appeared completely invulnerable for decades had been successfully dismantled, not via theatricality, but through sheer lucidity, forbearance, and verifiable documentation. As citizens pondered the sequence of events, they recognized a profound concept. The observable universe frequently masks the underlying truths operating beneath the exterior. Even the most laboriously crafted mythologies possess the potential to be completely overwritten by the emergence of factual, undeniable reality. It represented a juncture that reminded the global population that the sheer force of unmasking candor and forbearance retains the capacity to alter absolutely everything. This specific occurrence compelled society to reevaluate their accumulated knowledge, to interrogate outward appearances, and to grasp that true fortitude frequently operates in absolute silence. Above all else, it deposited a rudimentary yet potent truth in its aftermath. Reality, regardless of how diligently it is obscured, ultimately discovers a method to materialize.